Excellent, and we are ready to start also from the technical side. So welcome to our web debate in March. It's an absolute pleasure to have three excellent speakers with us, each an expert in their own field, but also to have an extremely diverse and especially big audience today. It's absolutely fantastic. So this is our web debate for the month of March. As you know, these web debates happen in the context of the International Forum on Diplomatic Training, and we focus on topics that are relevant for the work of diplomats. My name is Katharina Höhne. I'm a researcher with Diplo Foundation, and I have the pleasure to moderate this debate. So today we look at humanizing immigration. And immigration is obviously not a new topic, but it is a topic that brings up strong emotions, very different narratives, some compelling, some conflicting, some misleading. And all in all, the topic of immigration has very real consequences for individuals and societies that need to be addressed. So today, we're trying to unpack these narratives, and we're trying to think also in terms of challenges and opportunities of intercultural relations. And all of that also in the context of thinking about what is the role of the diplomat and diplomatic practice in all of this. As I said, we have three excellent speakers that all come from different perspectives, but that all have something extremely interesting to say, and we're going to create a very interesting mix of different perspectives and insights. So just to introduce them very briefly. So we have Ms. Efigenia Georgiadou, who's a teacher trainer and the director at the Hellenic Cultural Center in Greece. Hello. We have Dr. Atif Ahmed, who's a freelance educational consultant in Cairo. Last but not least, we have our very own Diana Scott, who's a senior fellow at Diplo Foundation. So before they give us their brief introduction into the topic, let me remind you that this debate is interactive. So we're really looking forward to your questions, your comments. And the way you can post your comments and questions is by putting them into the chat box, which for most of you should be on the lower left-hand side in your screen. I will look at them, I will collect them, summarize them, and relate them back to the speakers. And this is really important because we want to have this as interactive as possible, and we also want to answer to the key concerns and questions that come up in your context and from your professional perspective. But without further ado, I will give the floor to Efigenia, who will give us the introduction from her perspective. So Efigenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Katharina. Thank you for this invitation. You know that for everybody, and especially for us teachers who are in contact with other teachers and with children, is very important to talk about that. First, I would like to a little bit challenge the title of the debate today. You know that the humanism as a concept has been criticized, and I would say that many crimes have been committed in the name of humanism, in the name of humanity as a very abstract notion. Then sometimes humanism and humanity is only a pretext to dominate. The same goes to the words empathy and sympathy. Empathy, you know, that is sorrow, pity for someone who has a sympathy. Sympathy is a sorrow and pity for someone who has a problem. We can help him by, let's say, giving money, for example. But empathy is putting yourself in the shoes of others and really share his ideas and sentiments and feelings and opinions. And this is the way you can help him. I'm telling you this because I'm going to speak about intercultural education. Now, again about the title, Humanizing Immigration means maybe that we can speak about or we act towards migrants in a more or less inhuman way. Is that correct? Yes, it is correct, because we know all that in the hotspots, in the camps, migrants and refugees, especially refugees live in the camps, live in inhuman living conditions in the host countries, or there are state policies that are against them. They are not very welcoming, or of course they experience racism throughout society. One can also answer no, because they have many advantages. Sometimes they have more advantages than the locals. They have better access to the labor market. They enjoy protection by the modern states, and their children are going to schools, and they enter the universities. They are supported nowadays by so many organizations and NGOs. I believe that other speakers will talk about the immigration crisis and refugee crisis. We know that they come because of the economic crisis, environmental crisis, and the political crisis in their countries. And they come mainly to Europe. Why Europe? Europe is a multinational society. It was always a multinational society and is still evolving as an ethnic, cultural, and geographical concept. And I believe that this is one of the most characteristic features of Europe, of European societies. We have variety of ethnic groups, of cultural groups, and we have a wide range of cultural expressions in this area of the world. So we can say that we are like a palimpseston, it's a Greek word. So Europe's future, in my opinion, as a democratic, peaceful, rich part of the world, depends on its ability to adapt to a heritage of an increasingly complex set of identities, and to manage to take advantage of it. Here I have to tell you that not all European countries have the same policy towards migration, and especially towards the refugee crisis. And this shows exactly how much money is spent in either in asylum policies or integration policies or return policies in each member state of the European Union. And you see, you cannot find any country which is similar to the other. In general, we know that there is not a common European migration policy, unfortunately. We could say, and many people discuss about the problems that we have in Europe, and we run, and especially we in Greece, we are inside the financial crisis. Yes, European society have problems, but I would say that they are problems of development. One of these problems is the challenge of immigration. We are attractive countries because we are rich countries. Even the most poor countries among us are rich countries, and of course it's very natural that migrants seek refuge to their previous metropolis. As you know, metropolis means the central territory of a colonial empire. So since they know these languages, they come first to those countries. But we should be aware who is more in danger and who is more afraid. Migrants and locals feel that they have their identity at risk. And the host countries face unbalanced situations, let's say, in the labor market, in the health system, education system, etc. But the migrants and the refugees are more at risk. As an educationalist, I tend to answer the question, is education a solution, by a big yes. But now, after many years in education, I see that no, it's not. Education is not the solution. We need money to apply policies, and we need, most of all, political will, which is not the case sometimes. And yes, of course, education is an answer, because we can develop intercultural skills, develop empathy. We have different objectives of intercultural education: to explore different perceptions of history or history teaching, to look for similarities in our social systems, to raise curiosity about and empathy with other people's cultures and histories, and many others. I would refer now shortly to the intercultural skills that we should all develop. It is respect for oneself and for others, a sense of social justice and social responsibility, openness and curiosity towards diversity and not fear, tolerance of ambiguity, knowledge of culture, politics, history, archaeology. You know that many of refugees come from very old civilizations, very important civilizations, knowledge of human rights, knowledge of stereotypes, prejudices and discrimination practices, knowledge of cultural differences in communication, and I'm sorry to say that some so-called intercultural courses only refer to that. How can you greet someone his own way, etc. But this is not intercultural education. Then developing empathy, solidarity, the skill of solidarity, critical thinking, of course, in order to check your own stereotypes, active listening, finally dealing constructively with conflicts and conflict resolution skills. I will finish in a while saying about the different programs that are giving money, funding for having intercultural education for teachers and for diplomats and for other people. I believe that this PowerPoint will be distributed to the participants or uploaded, okay? But so I know that there are many programs that can fund intercultural education courses. I would say that the Council of Europe has done a lot of work and offer a lot of seminars for intercultural education for youth workers mainly. Salto is one of their centers for intercultural education. Also, the ICC, International Language Association, where I am coming from, we organize a conference in Berlin in May, early May, and we are going to talk about intercultural education and language in a multicultural world. Our center, the Hellenic Culture Center, which is based in Santorini and in Athens, Greece, offers very often intercultural education courses for teachers. Maybe my time has been.
Yes, I would suggest we stop here, and I think other points we can bring into the debate as it moves on. Just a couple.
Thank you.
Exactly. Some interesting observations. So your slightly more critical perspective on humanism, the difference between empathy and sympathy you introduced, Europe as an evolving concept, so something that is in motion, and then particularly the intercultural skills he outlined. And I think that is, all of these points are points that we will get back during question and answer, because all of them demand more attention. But for now, let me turn the focus to Atif for his overview introduction. And similar to Evgenia, Atif is also an educationalist, so I'm wondering if there's going to be a bit of a similarity in the perspective and also the emphasis on intercultural skills. But we will see. Over to you, Atif.
Thank you so much. Before I start my presentations, I'd like to thank Diplo Foundation for inviting me to talk about this hot topic. And before I talk, let me first clarify a very important point, that human immigration is very old and natural phenomenon. And we have seen that immigration, a lot of waves of immigration happened from Europe to North America, or from Europe to Asia, or to some countries. So we are not talking about a new phenomena. However, immigration is changed from a humanistic social phenomenon that contributes to the transfer of cultures and the contact of peoples to one another, into the phenomenon of transfer of violence, drugs, destruction, fear, terrorism, and even some people think that it leads to the clash of peoples. And I think this is not true. In that context, I remember a short verse in Quran says about, I think, about a human being, when God says, "O mankind, we have created you out of male and female, and we have made you nations and the tribes, that you may know and do good to one another. Surely the most honorable of you in the sight of God is he who guards against evil the most. Verily, God is all-knowing, all-aware." Let me also say that illegal or illegitimate or unorganized immigration, and I like the word unorganized immigration so much, because actually it expresses about what is happened now on the international stage regarding the immigration. I think it's one of the most threats to European countries nowadays, because some immigrants are involved in legal actions, and I fully understand why many European countries took a firm decision to address illegal phenomenon by adopting a security approach and also applying preventive laws to confront this phenomenon, and also to protect their national security. However, we are talking about the right of man, I mean capital M, man, to be secured and have a better life. And we are talking mainly about the human being, not politics. And I think we have two main reasons which depicting the image of unorganized immigration as a threat to European countries, especially after 11 September attack. One of them is the media, and the second reason is the political parties in Europe, who are always depict the immigration as a threat. It's not a humanistic social phenomenon that contributes to the transfer of cultures and the contact of peoples to one another, but transfer to the violence, terrorism, and destruction. So what happened that immigration pictures or phenomenon became linked to the organized crime, gangs, and a group of suspicious immigrants who may create a threat to social security in hosting country. I think that that is very important, but we don't look for the picture behind that. And please, I wanted to just to think about these pictures. This is Ilan, a third year's kid, was found drowned on the coast of Turkey, I think. He was traveling from Syria to Greece, but he was found dead and drowned. And please look to this picture. This is a kid also from Niger in Africa. He tries just to wake up his mom, his mother. She was dead as a result of the conflict in Niger, in that area. I think this is a very famous pictures about that. And look to, you know, these pictures and think for a few seconds about yourself. If you suppose that yourself in a country full of conflicts, wars, unrest, lack of political participation, lack of justice, equity, equality, low life conditions, and I have a family, I have a kids. So what I will do? So the most important thing is just to understand the human being, because if we understand the human being, that means we will understand how we can deal with this situation. And I like this picture so much. I have found it on YouTube. This guy it just only says we want to see who these people were and make a human connection and form an opinion. You know, that is the humanitarian instance. This guy is very intelligent, and he wants to see okay, who are those people. That is very important. But as threats, I don't think so. And please look to these kids and look to the sequence of wars and the conflicts in the Middle East and in Africa, and look to the children trauma. European countries, I think they should understand very important point that we are creating a new generation of violent people, because actually those children saw a lot of accidents and horrible incidents happened in their countries. Yeah, what I call it the children trauma. And maybe instability in Syria, for example, or in Yemen, for example. How we can think about it if we stop the immigrations? That means that we guarantee that immigrants will not immigrate from these conflicted areas to Europe. This is a question. Please, we are not talking about the politics. We are talking about the human being here. So how we can see this picture in that? I think that we have to reverse, to turn over the pictures of immigrants as threats to the national security for European countries to an asset to the European countries. And that is my sights about that. I fully understand the actual risk of the host countries in terms of terrorism, in terms of jobs. But at the same time, what European countries did as a strong partner in the world with the Middle East countries or the African countries to stop the conflicts and wars in that countries. Number two is, do you think that the jobs for in Europe is a threat because actually the immigrants wanted to work there? As I know that EU population is stable for decades, and youth there is not increasing. However, in the Middle East, for example, we see that more than a third of the population in the Middle East, they are between 20 and 29 years. And this is a huge number, millions of people, of young people in the Middle East or even in Africa here. And even, is it a threat to the culture? You know, the most important thing that we contact with each other. We understand each other. Even we understand traditions, customs, and European values and everything. But is it a threat to the language? I remember one of my friends, he is American, and he told me that his parents is very angry and upset because actually in his town in California, all the names of the shops were written in Spanish language. And they don't know the Spanish language, and so they are angry now. And we see that, you know, the U.S. administration or Donald Trump is building, you know, a wall between on the borders between Mexico and California, because some people think that this is a threat to the United States or California regarding to the language or whatever. So even, you know, the majority, if we are talking about the religion, I know that the majority of immigrants are Muslims. Is that a threat, or is that religions, Christianity or Jewish or Islam, is all of them, they can understand each other's, and it's the freedom of religions. It's very important here that it's not a threat. And we see that many European countries prohibited, you know, building religious buildings or mosques or something like that, or minarets or something like that. So we have to think about that. We are not talking about, you know, the politics, the policies, but we are talking about the human being, to save the human.
I'm really sorry, but I think
yes,
this is perhaps a good point to make a stop, and then we can get into the other question, especially what we need, what I just see on the slide here at a later point. But thank you for this kind of introduction, emphasizing that immigration is not a new phenomenon, asking us to have more empathy, putting yourself in someone else's shoe, then the question of how should Europe react? Is Europe exacerbating or alleviating human suffering? And then this question of threat narratives and looking behind these kind of narratives of threats when it comes to immigration. With that, I'll make a turn to Diana, who will also get us a bit closer to narratives, ways of framing, and then perhaps even diplomatic practice. But I think in the center of your comments will be language and the role of language, which I'm really looking forward to. So over to you, Diana.
Thank you very much, Katerina, and thank you to the two previous speakers. It's a pleasure to be able to follow up on many of the points that you've already made. I'm going to start with the premise that immigration has been largely dehumanized for reasons that are already appearing in the thread and which both of you have mentioned. And that has to do, first of all, with numbers. The numbers we're talking about are so huge that we can't relate to them individually. Has to do with the images that both of you have shown, which are so emotional that ultimately we need to switch off because we feel we can't do very much, and a compassion fatigue tends to set in. And then also immigration has become a little bit dehumanized because of this us versus them dynamic, which seems to be so fundamental to human beings, and we happen not to be the immigrants, and therefore we see them as the other, and possibly elicit rather negative feelings towards them as a result. So the topic, as I understand it, humanizing immigration, is really about rehumanizing immigration. Immigration, after all, is about human beings. But we need to rehumanize that dimension, or refocus the fact that it is about human beings in distress. And as to the immigration, I don't see immigration beginning only once somebody has entered into a country. I see it as the full arc. Now, the word has become ambiguous. We discussed this a little bit before we started. Immigration has come to stand for the more neutral migration, possibly, and it covers the whole arc from the crisis points which lead to immigration, discusses the transit involved of migrants, their terrible journeys, the difficulties at borders where walls and fences have been put up or where they are forbidden from disembarking, the trial and tribulations of detention centers, whether they are the savagery of the jungle in Calais or the limbo of Manus Island in Australia, and the inhuman treatment of zero tolerance policy, for instance, which separated children from their parents in America. But immigration also has to do with areas beyond actually entering into a host country, beyond even integrating into that host country, because the problem of immigration captures the problem of the dreamers being sent back to their countries of origin, for instance. Or in the UK, in the last year, the Windrush generation of Caribbean immigrants suddenly being sent back after 40 or more years to their countries of origin. Or when it comes to being deprived of citizenship, the problem of immigration may also even include the Rohingya, who had their status removed from them. And more recently in Britain, a debate that we can maybe enter, the whole business of ISIS wives and whether they should be allowed to return to their country of birth and citizenship. So what's happening, it seems to me, and this has been brought out by the two previous speakers, is that we seem to have an ambivalent attitude, or perhaps a polarized attitude towards the narrative of the problem of immigration. So we have on the one hand a narrative of humanizing, of including, of caring, of assuming responsibility, of expanding the moral circle and talking about the immigrants as one of us, someone that we owe something to, certainly a moral responsibility. But an alternative narrative, equally prevalent and on the ascendant in populist countries, has to do with dehumanizing immigrants, seeing them as the other, excluding them, barring them, denying them even human status. And these two narratives seem to be very entrenched in us as human beings. The reason for that probably has to do with our evolution. And there's a very interesting book indeed by somebody called Robert Sapolsky, Behave, the Biology of Humans at Our Best and at Our Worst, who looks into this very issue of our identity, how we draw the line between who is in group and who is in the out group, and how we tend to aggrandize ourselves and demote others. And he looks at it from the neurological, biological, endocrinological, every possible perspective, including the moral perspective. My own interest is very much in the ways in which language frames how we talk about immigration. And a particular area of language that I find very relevant is logical fallacies. So logical fallacies are arguments which are thought to be in some way misleading because they're not fully rational, and yet which are terribly effective because they're persuasive to us on an emotional level. So for instance, if we go back to the previous two narratives, we have the appeal to emotion in the Aylan Kurdi case, an appeal to compassion, to fellow feeling. In the case of the demonization of immigrants, we have Donald Trump using the snake a song by Oscar Brown Jr. from way back in the 70s, I think, to cast immigrants as vicious snakes who, if they are invited in, will simply bite us. And we will have deserved that fate by virtue of having invited those immigrants into our houses. So the poem itself has a refrain which says, "Take me in, O tender woman, take me in for heaven's sake. Take me in, O tender woman," sighed the snake. And the woman, the tender woman, does take the snake in, only to be bitten. And when she asks the snakes, "Why did you bite me? Now I will die," the snake replies, "Oh, shut up, silly woman," said the reptile with a grin. "You knew damn well I was a snake before you took me in." So what you have here is two conflicting narratives, the tender versus the tough. And my suggestion is that those narratives have always characterized us as human beings, and they characterize the current debate on immigration equally well. So why well, first of all, let me come back to logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are appeals to emotions, whether they are emotions of compassion or emotions of fear and threat, as you have mentioned. Logical fallacies can include appeals to essentialism, the idea that every culture has an essential defining quality and that every human being has an essential identifiable identity as well. Logical fallacies also include slippery slope arguments and metaphors, speaking through allegories and through symbols. All of these are fallacies and potentially misleading, depending on who is using these rhetorical devices for what purposes and to what success. Why do they speak to us? Because they speak to our emotions, they speak to our fears, they speak to our sense of who are we? And who are we in contrast and in comparison to others, for instance. The thing is that they don't only speak to us and resonate with our core issues, they also speak for us, because logical fallacies are like little genetic codes that get implanted into our thinking, because they're shorthand, they're easy, they mean that we don't really have to think for ourselves, because they're recognized by others as more or less valid arguments. And they are extremely dangerous. You listen to any debate on immigration, and you'll find a lot of logical fallacies being appealed to in order to persuade people of the view that you're carrying, whether it's tough or whether it's tender. Now, can we change? Can we escape from the grip of these logical fallacies? Or are we all doomed? I think we definitely can change, and it's very obvious that one of the ways in which we change is how we tell a story, how creative we are in framing a story. When Pablo Picasso painted Guernica in 1937 in response to the bombing of the Basques' town of Guernica by Nazis who were using it as live target practice, Picasso changed the way the world saw war and created a symbol of the suffering of innocence. When Fadi Abu Hassan in 2015 appropriated a small area on the top right-hand corner of Guernica and recast it as a symbol of migrants crossing the Mediterranean today, he transformed my view of those migrants by adding a whole historical cultural resonance to it. Something similar has been done, for instance, with Euripides' Medea, which is also a classical Greek play dealing with immigration and betrayal and revenge. But more recently, Luis Alfaro has cast it in a Mexican-American immigration setting through his film Mojada in 2015. a lot of other creative cultural endeavors are also delivering transformative narratives. And of the ones that I list here, the jungle perhaps is worth singling out, because one of the responses to the jungle, the Calais jungle, was that the play's message is, and I'm reading now from a review, it's transformative. While it's possible to come out with your views about the asylum issue unchanged, it's impossible to think about the refugees in the same way. They become human, says the reviewer. You laugh with them and you laugh at them, and you ask, and this is already happening as audiences leave the West End previews, what can I do? What can I personally do to reach out to these humans? That is humanizing immigration at the cultural level. The Nadine Labaki film Capernaum, if you have seen it, is appealing to all of us and asking the question, why is it worth being born if we must live a life that lacks dignity? Again, all topical, creative attempts to address the humanization of immigration.
Let me stop you at
Now,
this point.
That's where I wanted to start.
It's an excellent way to lead into debate and a very strong appeal. And I think all three of you have made very strong appeals for different ways of thinking of humanizing migration. From your presentation, Bojana, I really liked the fact that you emphasized that immigration is a process, that you helped us think about entrenched narratives, logical fallacies and how they appeal to our emotions and our collective identities. And then the important thing, turning this around by looking at narratives of transformation. I think that's fantastic. It really also feeds in with a couple of questions we already have from participants. And there are 4 questions I would like to highlight. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take them all together and then relay them back to you, and then you can comment on them. Please be brief, because time is running so incredibly fast. It's unbelievable. So in your answers, please be as brief as you can. So, Ole Guldal asks a very interesting question that fits with what Bojana already said. And he's basically saying there is this negative attitude towards immigration. How can we change this? And Bojana addressed this beautifully. But if you have other additional comments, please bring this forth. He also says the debate is often framed in a very technical perspective, so what can we do? And again, Bojana already made some brilliant points in this regard. Another question is, in terms of framing migration, from Yolanda Spies, who basically asks, migration seems to be discussed as a security issue more and more. What do you see as the challenges of viewing migration through this lens? Then a very interesting challenge coming from Mulessa Muya, I hope I pronounced this correctly, and she challenges us to actually change perspective from a European perspective to a different kind of perspective. She says, I'm interested to know how intercultural education can benefit Africa, knowing that Africa is the most affected when it comes to migration due to war, disease, and search for greener pastures in Europe, for example. That's an interesting challenge, and I think it's a perspective we have not addressed yet. Last but not least, a question from Victoria Romero, who basically asks, so immigration is this process, but can we foster or can we engineer integration, and should we even try? 4 very big questions leading into very different directions. Over to you. I would go in the same order as we started, so it's Yenya, Atif, and then Bojana. And please be as brief as possible, because then we maybe have time for another round of questions. But over to you.
Well, I can't say anything else other than education, intercultural education. But I want to remind that I have already said, I'm talking about how can we change it. I have already said that the political leaders should have courage diplomats as well should have courage to have policies, different policies than the ones we follow now, and to give money to integration. But in general, my own answer is education, intercultural education, which is very important for the multicultural societies we all live in. And it addresses everybody, not only the migrants and the refugees. Now, I'm taking another question about, or maybe you want to have a round on the first question first?
No, all questions, okay. All the questions I summarized now together. If you can, in very brief, focused comments.
Yes. About the Islam, I would say that religious education, again, should change in every country. And the way we integrate religion into our lives, and understand that in order to be, if we like to be, better Christians or better Muslims, we need tolerance. And all religions do this, ask for that. So I don't think that Islam is makes us insecure. We should not be insecure. Now, education about how education can benefit Africa. When I was talking about these funding programs, there are African countries. All African countries can participate in different European Commission's Erasmus Plus program through the youth program and other programs. So there is funding so that they can do projects together. And I'm not sure about the fourth question. Can you again repeat, please?
I think the fourth question I relate to you was this question of integration, whether it can be engineered or fostered, and whether we should even try.
Yes, integration should be fostered through specific policies by politicians. And then
over to Atif, who, given his position, might have a slightly different perspective also on the question of Africa. But over to you, Atif.
Well, I think that we need for integration for the immigrants. Number one is we have to collaborate with the central statistical offices is necessary. What I mean is data about the immigrants. It's not only the data, but knowledge about the immigrants themselves. So we need knowledge about the immigrants. That means that the countries or communities should cooperate or exchange information with the authorities with these countries which a lot of immigrants come from. This is number one. Number two, I think that the role of arts, what I mean the role of artists in Europe, because actually that is very important to depict the correct pictures or image about the immigrants here. Artists can play an important role in forming the souls of the people or changing the views of the citizens toward the immigrants. Number three, I'm talking about the political media and the political parties, because actually political parties are influenced a lot with the media. So they recruit or use the immigrations untrue stories about them in elections and for political interest and something like that. So we have to clarify that we need an honest media which show the real status of the immigrants. Number three, I think that diplomats always cooperate with corporates, with civil society organizations, with the government, with others, but they neglect to cooperate with the religious entities. That is very important, because actually when we talk about the human being, we are talking about the religions. So because actually all the human beings' values came from the religions, whether it's Islam, Christianity, or Jewish, or something like that. So that is very important when we talk about empathy, tolerance, equality, handshaking, justice, prosperity, mercy, charity. All these values actually came from religions. And we all know that from our religions. Although in education schools, or in the schools and in education, we learn it a lot, but back to humanity is to back to the essence of the religions. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, over to Liana.
Okay, in response to Ula's question about the growing resistance to immigration, and is this a passing stage, or are we going to become more tolerant? I hope that this is a passing stage, but as you know, I believe that this debate between a dialogue of tolerance and a dialogue of intolerance is one that characterizes mankind, and there are always going to be weighing up against each other. There's no escape from it. We certainly mustn't get complacent. I know that Steven Pinker thinks that we are all, statistically, the evidence suggests, getting more and more civilized and more humane in our treatment of each other. But there will always be the counter narrative towards intolerance, and we see a lot of that in Europe and in America, and therefore we cannot become complacent. We have to constantly be promoting greater tolerance and humanity. In response to Yolanda's question about the securitization of migration, and is the link between immigration and security a dangerous one to focus on, it's a necessary one to focus on, and therefore it would be dangerous to avoid it, simply because some people might then connect the two and think that immigration is all about security. I think a debate will widen up the other dimensions of immigration, and indeed, interestingly enough, the whole Brexit debate seems to have resulted in a poll that came out yesterday, I think, in the BBC program Crossing Divides, which suggested that since 2011, when there were 64% of the British population who thought that immigration problem was bad, there's less than 26% who now think that immigration is bad. So I think debate changes people's attitudes. I think the how is intercultural communication applicable to Africa has been discussed, but I'm happy to come back to it. I'll zoom on to Victoria's question about can we engineer integration. I think we can, and I think we do. I think the question of learning the host language, I think the question of avoiding ghettos, the question of understanding the role of religion, as has been discussed, are all dimensions in that particular exercise of fostering and perhaps even engineering integration. I think we have a lot to learn on that front, and that's probably what's currently happening. It would be great if countries were to exchange their experience. And I see, Ulla, that you're the CEO of a reception center in Sweden. you would have a lot of good advice, I'm sure, to give other equivalent NGOs in other countries, because your learning curve, I imagine, must be huge.
Thank you, Diana. That's also it's also a good reminder that we need to continue this conversation, which we will do through email, through following up on the debate. So now I have a challenge for our three speakers. There's one question I still want to bring into the debate, and then I would like to ask one question myself. So we have a number of participants in Belgrade from the Conflux Center and the mediation workshop that is going on there right now. And they want us to open up a conceptual question again, and I think it's important we address this. So the question is, when we say immigration in the context of this debate, how does it relate to refugees? Do we include that in the context of this debate? And are these, to what extent are these concepts different? So that's one question. And then the question I would like to add here, and a kind of a question for final reflections from your end. How does what we've discussed today, how does it relate to diplomatic practice? Or perhaps more specifically, what is your key advice for diplomatic practitioners who want to take some of the things we discussed today on board in their practice? I would say we follow the same order again, but keeping in mind to keep it short, and that these are basically, unfortunately, already the final words in the debate. But first and foremost, over to you, Efigenia.
Thank you, Katerina. So two things only. In my sense, I don't see that there is a huge difference between migrants and refugees. They all come from countries that face different social, economic, political problems, environmental problems. It's just that refugees have a more hard way to follow a hard way to come, and it's traumatic to them. And they also have different aims, like they don't want, for example, to go and stay in one country, like Greece, which is the first point, but they want to go to another country, etc. As for the diplomats, the only thing I can think now is that we teachers say that our final aim is to be useless, to have our students able to have knowledge, to develop ethical principles, etc. So I would say that diplomats also have to be useless. Try to stop wars, first thing, try to stop wars, and try to maybe seeing other countries, the third countries, as previous colonies of the Europeans. Thank you.
Well, I think that it's very hard to just only to say suggestions about that, but anyway, it's to stop immigration or illegal immigration is impossible. So I think that diplomats should think about a new policy for immigrations, and I'd like the idea of opening the door of immigration to Europe, but legally. And I think that the idea of blue card, which is a blue card or white card, I don't, yeah, okay, whatever, which is similar to the U.S. green card in United States, which allows immigrants come to the United States from different countries, especially the developing countries. That is very important, because actually stopping illegal immigration is impossible. So at the same time, diplomats should think about how we can make a balance between protecting the national security and also opening the door to the immigrants to be residents for to work or something, work permissions or something like that. That is very important. Number two is cooperations with the importing countries. Importing countries, the countries which immigrants come from. They should first, both of them, they should cooperate together first, because actually here the responsibility is not for European countries only, but between the two sides. They should help these countries in development, in teaching global education, in making these countries stable. That is very important. Mainly in development. Mainly in development. So cooperation between the two sides must be bigger or larger than that. That is very important here. So let us think for a new policy for immigrations, but legal immigration, and then I know that we can take, we have firm laws or preventive laws or preventive policies which reduce the numbers of immigrants, but we will not stop them. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, in response to the question about whether this debate is about migrants, economic migrants, or refugees, I think immigration covers both voluntary and involuntary immigration in this debate, but I note and I agree with the comment again by Ule Guldal that there is the risk that refugees become second-order immigrants as opposed to economic migrants, which is absolutely false. Refugees are not simply needy and coming to milk a state of its benefits. They have skills, they have talents, they have a lot to offer, and we have to do everything we can not to differentiate between first order and second order style of immigrants. Now, with regard to the concluding question about diplomacy and what can diplomacy do to humanize immigration, cultural diplomacy, public diplomacy, humanitarian diplomacy, second track diplomacy, these are all areas of diplomacy where a lot is already being done to humanize immigration. I think laws are also changing. We have more recently the disaster law, human rights law, international humanitarian law, and the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights and its directives. These are, and many more others, which are all have been introduced in the last 10 years and more recently. So there has been a considerable change under the pressure to humanize. It's a desire to humanize this whole immigration problem. But I'd like to leave you with one interesting suggestion, because I have been asking myself whether humanizing immigration is a concern for mainstream diplomacy or not. And I think an interesting way of approaching this question is to turn diplomacy on its head and to say, what if we were to imagine that the state today is a migration state, and that diplomacy today is primarily about migration? And what I mean by that is that a migration state is one where the management of migration flows is a central component of state functions and interests. So instead of seeing migration as a side issue that's a bit of a, thorn in the side of mainstream diplomacy, we see diplomacy primarily as the concern of the kind of state that we have become today, and that is a migration state. And a migration state includes both countries which send migrants out, so countries of emigration, transit countries, and countries that receive migrants, so countries of the immigration. And each of these countries has a different place in that dynamic of where and how they can manage and benefit from or be at risk of immigrants. And each of them can interact with others to their advantage. So for instance, Turkey in 2016 threatened to bus a lot of their migrants into Greece and Bulgaria. And in order not to act on that threat, they were given a lot of money and accelerated accession to the EU and a lot of other incentives. Similarly, Jordan said in 2016 that they were at boiling point. They couldn't take any more migrants. And so they were incentivized not to let those migrants flood out into neighboring countries with financial and other opportunities. Migrants here are becoming a bit of a token of leverage in diplomacy. And that then asks again the question, how is mainstream diplomacy going to humanize immigration rather than use it as a tool, a leverage to obtain whatever any particular country wants to do? And by turning this question around, and I've given you references in my PowerPoint because it's in an article in December 2018 that this concept of migration diplomacy has been put forward as a central way of framing the relationship between diplomacy and immigration.
Well, all that is left for me to do is to thank our three fantastic speakers for lots of food for thought, lots of interesting ideas, but also challenges to our thinking. So thank you, Eugenia, Atif, and Liana. It was an absolute pleasure. Also, thank you to our audience for being with us, for asking challenging questions. All that is left to say is also that we will follow up. We will follow up with the recording of the web debate, with the summary, and with the presentations, which if you sign up to this debate, you can get via email. Thank you so much, and let's keep the conversation going from here, because we heard a lot of really important points also to reflect on the practice of diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you, to colleagues.
Thank you, Katerina. And Iphigenia and Ahmed and everybody in the backup team. Thank you.